I've already stated that this first season for Tom Baker's Doctor was really firing on all cylinders, and it's probably the best introduction of any of the Doctors. Just one after another, you're hit with these really astounding pieces of narrative here for each episode. And then with that going on, it's only a matter of time before a masterpiece arrives. And in my humble opinion, Genesis of the Daleks is probably the best Doctor Who adventure ever produced. Discounting, of course, whatever, novels and comic books and all that. And who knows, maybe Big Finish has got a masterpiece I just haven't seen. They've got some good stuff. I've enjoyed the few that I've listened to. But this one here, boy, I tell you, the lessons, and you could get these lessons of production and whatnot from the other episodes within this season you've already seen, and how things are utilized, most notably simplicity. Now, I guess the Suntaran experiment is the most usage of simplicity in that, well, they just went out to some field somewhere and taped this episode, this series of shows that was pretty damn good, and yet it's so simple. It's just a handful of people out there running around and, I don't know, cow pasture or whatever it was. And then here you have the Genesis of the Daleks, and a lot of it is just the same hallway shot from different angles, moody lighting, and certainly a few outdoor shots, but that's just mostly the setup, the really bleak atmosphere of the war-torn and definitely scarred planet of Skaro, aptly named, and from the devastation of the war that was fought there that ultimately led to the creation of the Daleks. But then the interior of the bunker, or bunkers, I guess I should say, and the utilization of that, which in the wrong hands comes across as silly and stupid, but here works exactly point by point, and it just, you're drawn in to the story in and of itself, so that the surrounding, the sets and whatnot, it's not really all that important, but it's just good enough to keep you there. It doesn't take you out of the story. Now, there's a lot of things there. Watching it again, I realized, oh yeah, those columns, that's the ones that ends up in the TARDIS. And it's probably the same little panels. They just added the circular panels for the, for the hallways of the TARDIS and all that. But anyway, these guys knew what they were doing. And of course, lighting and keeping it dark here and there and all that just adds to it. The costume, of course, is completely stolen top to bottom from the Nazis, but that's appropriate considering what the Daleks are all about. And of course, allusions to things like World War I and whatnot, which is more in the shared memory, I suppose, of Britain than it is with America, of course, and Europe as a whole for that war, not just World War II, but the horrific devastation of that war, and just the haunting images of gas masks and that sort of thing, which does give this sort of grim, almost a Grim Reaper type visage for the faces of those soldiers. And just the interesting aspects of right off the bat, they discover them. I think one of them said this, it's like finding a caveman with a transistor radio, about they had sophisticated weaponry and then flintlock rifles, because they were just so devastated with materials and stuff of this god-awful war that they were engaged in, which apparently was a race war. You had the Thals and the Khaleds. This is where it began, and so the Doctor realizes, oh, that's the origin of the name. And then you get the Time Lords. Here, of course, in the last adventure after the Suntaran experiment, the Doctor, Harry, and Sarah were teleporting out, are transmitting, supposed to go back to the Nova space station. And instead, they get intercepted by the Time Lords, who have a little job for the Doctor. And we get this mysterious Time Lord all in black, who appears to the Doctor and explains to him why they want him here, and they're saying your mission is to prevent the development of the Daleks, or reduce them in some amount so they're not as destructive as they will inevitably become. And it's interesting now, of course, and I think it's largely seen as this is the sort of beginning point of what ultimately becomes the Time War. And I always like to just, in my own headcanon, that's Borusa in the black outfit. I always thought of Borusa as one of these guys who probably was working behind the scenes and understood that the Doctor was actually quite useful and didn't always want to stay true to the non-interference doctrine of the Time Lords, and certainly could see a lot of use of the Doctor as sort of an agent who operates on the outside of the rest of the Time Lords. And so, but I think there was, I'm not entirely certain if this was done in Big Finish or if it was a novel or whatever, but that particular Time Lord was actually someone from the Time War, that he came back to the past. Why they would need the fourth Doctor to do it when they could have just recruited the War Doctor to do it, I don't keep with that. I like to think that Time Lord, if it's not Borusa, then it's a Time Lord from the timeline of the fourth Doctor. It was just like, hey, look, we decided to do this. But you always keep it in mind that what was the motivation of Borusa in time? We haven't met him yet as far as this in this series, but he becomes this recurring Time Lord that was significant in the life of the Doctor as one of his teachers, and ultimately turns wrong, apparently probably for some kind of psychosis of a bad regeneration or whatnot, and becomes the villain in the Five Doctors. But what's his ultimate goal there? What's motivating him so much? And you could surmise, or conclude rather, that he knew of the coming Time War. He might have looked into the future and he saw it coming, and he knew the Daleks were a huge threat to Gallifrey and whatnot, and manipulates these situations for the Doctor in the hopes that this could lead to their defeat. Of course, it doesn't work, as we would find out in this episode. But that's an interesting little side note there. But I guess that's not really going to be the case. But there we have the Doctor. He's a little upset, but once the Time Lord tells him, "Hey, look, it's your chance to do away with the Daleks," so he's all right. Let's do it. If there's anything that I would find any kind of fault or flaw, is this. Gee, it kind of sucks the TARDIS isn't there, just damn it. But they got intercepted through a transmat beam, and they'll get to the TARDIS later. So it's not there. And the only other thing that I thought was a bit off is when Harry and the Doctor have to escape to try to get to the military leadership of the college and hope to convince them that Davros was the wrong way to go. And they have to go through this underground cavernous area where Davros has apparently dumped his earlier experiments, these mutated monstrosities that are there. And it might have been better to just sort of hint that there was a monster with sound effects and whatnot, and they managed to get through. But instead they figured, they got to get attacked by one. And so what happens is Harry steps into a giant clam. What are you going to do? But other than that, this is a magnificent adventure for the Doctor, and mood inside. So many lessons to learn here when you hear about complaints about not having money and all this. You think, how much money do you think they had here for this? Now comparable to times, maybe they had, quite a bit. I don't know, but it didn't look it. It just, there's a lot of simplicity here, again, with angles and shots and lighting and whatnot, and the sets and how they handle them. And it's all very credible and believable, and it just works. And but what really draws you in is, of course, the story itself. And this was an interesting idea. They gave an origin story to the Daleks. You didn't really have one before. And it fits in. It really begins this, adversarial road, not just with the Doctor, but with the Time Lords themselves. That this is a really dangerous force for evil in the universe, that being the Daleks. And of course, It's significant for his introduction of Davros, who was, before him, it was always just the Daleks, and then after that, Davros is always around. So he was never going to go away. And so there he is. And the interesting thing there is not only do you get this great Doctor Who episode, but you get a very pivotal scene that, again, is very simple. It's kind of short, but it's probably one of the, if not the best confrontation scenes between the hero and the villain. And that's when Davros is, he's already captured the Doctor, and he forced him to reveal the secret future of the Daleks, which the Doctor knows. And so the Doctor is forced to do this, otherwise he'll, torture Harry and Sarah, and so he does. And then after that, Davros is fascinated with the Doctor, and he's finally meeting someone that he can actually respect, because he doesn't respect anyone else. And so they have this conversation, and it's this back and forth, and ultimately, just, even the Doctor's curiosity is, because he says, Davros, if you had a virus that could wipe out all life, would you release it? And of course, Davros thinks about it, says, yeah, I would. Of course, that's what he's doing with the Daleks. The same thing, And it's this back and forth between them like that. Is this great moment, and I think that sort of tops other adventures and shows and movies and whatnot between hero and villain here, and it's just a really great thing to see, and it's very quick, it's very simple, but the tension's there, and the performances between the two actors is spot on. It's great. It's magnificent. No other special effects or sets or whatever would make it any better. It's great the way it is, and it's a real testament to greatness that the Doctor Who series achieved. And this is a pivotal moment that best, like I said, even others, even Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader. I mean, it's just a great, maybe it's just me, but the way I see it, and that performance there is just magnificent. and it's never going to get topped. It's kind of like maybe Doctor Who peaked at that moment. I don't know. And that was it. But if anything comes out of it, that was the best. The design of the Daleks was the idea is that was supposed to be a minimalist approach too. I actually think it's the best. The other ones, whether they're in different colors and all that, and I guess that was supposed to be like the ranks they make for themselves later, and then the little eyes on the heads of the Dalek, the lights. The eye is the one thing in the middle, but the little beeping lights on the head. They later have these big cones on there and stuff like that, or cylinders or what have you. But the shorter ones, I think, just works better because it's more this minimalist look to it, because why would they care? And they're rather dark and just so soulless like that makes them this true force of evil, because even the Khalids were on board with the idea, but then when they realize, they're not going to have any conscience, and they say, and Davros, they don't need that. That's a weakness, but it shows through with the design and look of the Daleks themselves. And of course, it all backfires on Davros. He gets what's coming to him. And he's begging for pity at the end. It's a great send-off. Of course, it's not the end of Davros, but maybe it should have been, but what are you going to do? So that's all well and good. And of course, the pivotal scene of the Doctor has the moment where he can wipe out the Daleks. And then but do I have the right? And of course, Sarah, she's like, yeah, you do. What's the problem here? And then when it came to the moment, he couldn't do it. And he says, well, he opened, and even in the end of the show, he says, well, even out of all their evil, there must come some good and all that. And he says, look, I know a lot of their story. A lot of alliances were formed because of their fear of the Daleks and sort of, and all this sort of stuff. And yeah, but the Time Lord's mission was about something bigger than even that, Doctor. And I guess he missed it. And so, but technically he set them back a bit because ultimately that laboratory of the mutated Dalek does get destroyed, ironically enough, by a Dalek. But they do survive. They're entombed and buried in the bunker at the end, but of course they do recover. And so I always wondered, this ultimately changed time to where the point that the Hartnell adventure that introduces the Daleks doesn't quite happen the way it did anymore. You know, I mean, does that world look like it becomes that world? You know, because it's in the distant future of that point that I guess, you know, well, the Daleks, they developed themselves buried under the old Khaled city and bunker and whatnot, and then rebuild eventually to become the creatures you see in that first adventure, with the Thals having become these, you know, rather, I don't know, hippies in the forest or something. And they don't quite understand what they're walking into, and then the Daleks just wipe them all out. That sort of thing. I mean, the war begins anew. So maybe not so much, but it seems to indicate that it would have to stand to reason that those versions of Daleks now no longer exist, perhaps. I don't know. It's not really going to be explored further, I imagine. But ultimately, the Doctor failed in his mission. He didn't really do what he was sent to do. And I always thought one of my favorite things about it, if they did bring back Barusa, this could have been an interesting character who's not necessarily a villain, but isn't necessarily a friend of the Doctor either. And it can certainly understand a certain motivation for that character to be very, very upset with the Doctor. So you had this moment, you had it right there in the palm of your hands, and you didn't do it. So whatever crimes I may have committed is nothing compared to yours. You know, it's just the whole time war is your fault, and that could be like a split between them, and then maybe there could be a resolution down the road if he had had been introduced as a character in New Who for an arc of stories and that sort of thing. But it didn't happen that way. So, you know, I just thought it was an opportunity for something along those lines. Anyway, yes, Genesis of the Daleks, I think it's the greatest Doctor Who adventure ever done. There are some other great episodes, but I think this is the top of the mountain. And sadly, I don't think the opportunity of a greater one is anywhere near. And that's too bad. But there you go. So, man, and it's still not over. There's another episode coming when the Doctor meets yet some other old enemies in this little tour of time and space that he took Harry and Sarah on. So there you go. Thank you for watching and listening. Say, why not like and subscribe, and check out that link description below. That'll take you to my mini stores that have plenty of goodies for you, most notably my comic book Night Night. Oh yeah, over at IndiePlanet.com. And of course you can catch my podcast, Mr Nailsin Show, over at RadioMisfits.com. And of course you can also watch my videos over at BitChute.